What happens when a woman crosses half a continent for love, only to be rejected like damaged goods the moment she steps off the train? When Marjorie Hale arrived in Wyoming as a mail-order bride, she expected a new beginning. Instead, she found humiliation, cruelty, and a one-way ticket back to nowhere. The crowd looked away. The groom's family sneered. The train whistle screamed. But one cowboy refused to let injustice win. This is the story of a woman who was returned like unwanted cargo, and the man who chose her when no one else would. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The winter wind cut through Marjorie Hale's threadbare coat like 1,000 tiny knives as she stood on the platform of Hollow Creek Station, Wyoming. Her fingers, pale and trembling, clutched the handle of her small leather satchel, the only possession she had left in the world that truly belonged to her. Inside were 3 dresses, a worn Bible her mother had given her before the fever took her, a tin locket with no picture inside, and the letters. Those damned letters that had promised her everything and delivered nothing but shame. The train behind her belched steam into the frozen December air, its metal wheels still ticking from the long journey. She had been traveling for 6 days, 6 days of cramped seats, stale bread, and the constant rocking that made her stomach turn. 6 days of hope slowly curdling into fear. 6 days of reading and rereading the letters from Thomas Garrett, the man who had promised to marry her, to give her a home, to save her from the gutted remains of her life back in Philadelphia. That's her? The voice was sharp, female, and dripping with disgust. Marjorie's head snapped up. Standing before her on the platform was a woman in her 40s, dressed in a burgundy traveling suit with impeccable tailoring. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate arrangement beneath a feathered hat, and her eyes, cold gray, calculating, raked over Marjorie from head to toe like a rancher inspecting a questionable horse at auction. "I'm Marjorie Hale," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here to meet—" "We know who you're here to meet," the woman snapped. "I'm Constance Garrett, Thomas's sister." She said the word sister the way someone might say owner or protector. "And I can see already that there's been a grave misunderstanding." Behind Constance stood 2 men. The first was young, perhaps 25, with Thomas's features but harder, meaner. This had to be James, the younger brother mentioned in the letters. The second man was older, barrel-chested, with a thick mustache and the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. Their father, she guessed. Robert Garrett, owner of the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, according to Thomas's letters. "Where's Thomas?" Marjorie asked, craning her neck to look past them. "He said he'd meet me personally. He said—" "Thomas isn't coming," Constance interrupted. "We convinced him to let us handle this situation." The way she said situation made Marjorie's stomach drop. "I don't understand," Marjorie said, but even as the words left her mouth, she understood perfectly. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of the Philadelphia society ladies who used to employ her mother as a seamstress, in the faces of the factory foremen who'd refused to hire her after her mother died, in the expressions of the landlord who'd evicted her from their tiny apartment. It was the look of someone who'd decided you were beneath them, unworthy, disposable. "You lied," James said, speaking for the first time. His voice was high-pitched, almost childish, which made his words somehow more cutting. "In your letters, you lied about everything." "I didn't lie," Marjorie protested, her voice rising. "I told the truth about everything. I said I was 23. I said I worked in a textile factory. I said my parents were dead. I said I had no siblings. I said—" "You said you came from a respectable family," Constance interrupted, pulling a folded paper from her handbag. "You said your father was a craftsman. You made yourself sound like a woman of breeding who'd fallen on temporary hardship." She unfolded the paper, one of Marjorie's letters, and read aloud with theatrical disgust. "My father was a skilled artisan, and though circumstances have humbled our family, I was raised with proper values and Christian morals." "Proper values?" She spat the words. "Your father was a drunk who died in a gutter fight. Your mother took in sewing to feed you. You lived in the Irish slums of Philadelphia. You're practically shanty Irish yourself." Heat flooded Marjorie's face. "My father was a woodworker before the drink took him. That's a craftsman. My mother did take in sewing, yes, honest work, and I never said we were wealthy. I said we fell on hard times. Everything I wrote was true. You omitted, Robert Garrett finally spoke, his voice like grinding stones. You painted a picture designed to deceive. My son thought he was getting a respectable woman who understood her station. Instead, we get this. He gestured at her dismissively. Marjorie looked down at herself, seeing what they saw. Her coat was patched at the elbows. Her dress, her best dress, was 3 years old and had been mended so many times the original fabric was almost an afterthought. Her boots were scuffed, the leather cracked. Her hair, though she'd tried to pin it neatly, had been ravaged by 6 days of travel and the brutal wind. She looked exactly like what she was, a poor woman who'd spent her last dollars on a train ticket west, betting everything on the kindness of a stranger. I can work, she said, hating the pleading note in her voice. I'm strong. I can cook, clean, sew. I can help on the ranch. Thomas said he needed a helpmate, and that's what I can be. I won't be a burden. You'll get back on that train, Constance said flatly. Right now, before this humiliation goes any further. But Thomas was foolish, Robert cut in. He got romantic notions from those dime novels he reads. Thought he could rescue some poor girl from the East and she'd be grateful enough to make him a good wife. But we're not in the business of charity, Miss Hale. This is a business arrangement, and you violated the terms through misrepresentation. I have nowhere to go, Marjorie whispered. The words escaped before she could stop them, and she hated herself for the weakness they revealed. I sold everything I had to come here. The factory where I worked closed. My landlord took everything I couldn't carry. I have $3 to my name and nobody in Philadelphia who remembers my name. Please. The word burned her throat. Please, just let me speak to Thomas. The eastbound train leaves in 20 minutes, Constance said, already turning away. James will purchase your ticket. Father will ensure you board. This unfortunate episode ends now. Wait. Marjorie grabbed Constance's arm. The older woman whirled, eyes blazing, and jerked her arm away as if Marjorie carried disease. Don't you dare touch me, Constance hissed. James! James moved forward, gripping Marjorie's upper arm hard enough to bruise. Come on, don't make this worse for yourself. I did nothing wrong, Marjorie's voice cracked. I answered an advertisement. I corresponded honestly. I came in good faith. You can't just... We can do whatever we want, James said, dragging her toward the ticket office. This is our town, our station, our railroad shares. You're nobody, and you have no rights here. The platform wasn't crowded, but there were enough people to witness the spectacle. A woman in a green dress clutched her husband's arm and whispered behind her gloved hand. 2 ranch hands loading freight stopped to stare. The station master, a thin man with wire spectacles, looked up from his ledger and then quickly looked down again, clearly wanting no part of whatever was happening. Marjorie stumbled, and James jerked her upright. Walk properly. Let go of me. She tried to pull free, but his grip was iron. You'll board that train if I have to throw you through the window, James said conversationally. Father would prefer we handle this quietly, but I don't particularly care. They reached the ticket window. James released her arm long enough to slap bills on the counter. 1 ticket to Omaha, eastbound, departing train. The clerk, a young man who couldn't have been more than 18, glanced nervously between James and Marjorie. Sir, the lady might want to choose her own. The lady, James said coldly, is getting exactly what she deserves. Ticket, now. The clerk printed the ticket with shaking hands and slid it across. James snatched it up and grabbed Marjorie's arm again, pulling her toward the train. Please, Marjorie said again, and she despised herself for it, for begging, for the tears now streaming down her frozen cheeks, for the weakness that made her seek mercy from people who clearly had none to give. Please, I'll go back to Philadelphia. I'll tell no one what happened. Just give me a day to rest, to wash, to... You'll rest on the train, Constance said, appearing beside them like a dark bird of prey. Far away from here, where you can't spread lies about my family or embarrass us further. What lies? Marjorie demanded. What could I possibly say that were cruel, that we broke a promise, that we treated you unfairly? Constance's eyes glittered. You could go to the newspapers, claim you were deceived, drum up sympathy from weak-minded reformers who think every sob story deserves charity. I've seen it before. Women like you thinking they can trap men above their station, then crying victim when it doesn't work. She leaned closer, her perfume sickeningly sweet. You're a con artist, Miss Hale. Maybe not a clever one, but a con artist nonetheless. And we're simply ensuring you don't get the chance to run your con. I'm not... But Marjorie's denial was lost as James hauled her up the train steps. The conductor, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, stepped forward. Ma'am, are you boarding of your own free will? It was the first decent question anyone had asked her since she'd arrived. Marjorie opened her mouth, and for a moment she considered saying no, considered making a scene, considered screaming that she was being forced. But what would that accomplish? She'd still have no money, no prospects, nowhere to go. And these people, the Garretts, they owned this town. The conductor's kindness would evaporate the moment he understood who he'd be opposing. Answer him, James growled. Marjorie met the conductor's eyes. She saw the sympathy there, but also the resignation. He knew she had no real choice. Yes, she whispered. I'm boarding. The conductor nodded slowly, and she saw his jaw tighten. Very well, ma'am. He stepped aside. James pushed her into the train car. It was nearly empty. Most people didn't travel in December unless they had to. He shoved her into a seat near the back, threw her satchel after her. Stay put. If you get off this train before Omaha, I'll have the sheriff arrest you for theft. Theft? Marjorie gasped. I haven't stolen anything. You stole my brother's time, his hope, his dignity, James said. That's theft enough. And in this territory, we take care of thieves. He touched the revolver at his hip, the threat unmistakable. Then he was gone, stomping back down the aisle and off the train. Through the window, Marjorie saw him rejoin his father and sister. Constance was already walking toward a fancy carriage, dismissing the entire incident as if it had never happened. Robert was lighting a cigar, looking bored. James stood with his arms crossed, watching the train like a guard ensuring a prisoner didn't escape. Marjorie's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together in her lap. The tears wouldn't stop, and she didn't even bother wiping them away. What was the point? There was no one to maintain dignity for, no one who cared. She was alone, humiliated, and about to be shipped back to a city where she'd starve within a week. The train whistle shrieked, a long, mournful cry that echoed across the platform. 5 minutes to departure. Marjorie stared out the window at Hollow Creek, at the town she'd allowed herself to imagine as home. The main street visible from the platform was lined with decent buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and magnificent against the pale winter sky. For a few brief moments during the journey, she'd let herself dream about those mountains, about breathing clean air, about maybe having a garden in spring. Stupid. So stupid. Excuse me. Marjorie looked up. An older woman, maybe 60, with gray hair and a weathered face, stood in the aisle. She wore a simple but clean dress and carried a basket. Are you all right, dear? The kindness in her voice nearly broke Marjorie completely. Yes, she managed. Thank you. You don't look all right. The woman sat down across from her without invitation. I saw what happened out there. The Garretts can be difficult people. They're within their rights, Marjorie heard herself say. I'm not what they expected. I doubt that's true, the woman said gently. I'm Agnes Morrison. I run a boarding house here in town. Marjorie Hale. She couldn't muster the energy for anything more. Agnes pulled a handkerchief from her basket and handed it over. Here, clean yourself up a bit. Marjorie took it, dabbed at her face. Thank you. I'm sorry. This must be... I must look. You look like someone who's had a very hard day, Agnes said. I've had a few of those myself. She paused, studying Marjorie's face. Were you truly dishonest with Thomas Garrett? Forgive me for being forward, but I knew his mother. She was a good woman. Died when Thomas was young. Since then, Constance has run that family like a prison warden. I wasn't dishonest, Marjorie said quietly. I told the truth as I understood it, but the truth wasn't impressive enough, I suppose. Agnes nodded slowly. Thomas is a sweet boy. Man, I should say. He's 27 now. But Constance has terrified him since childhood. She's 9 years older and acted as his mother after the real one passed. Whatever she decided about you, he'd never contradict her. He didn't even come to meet me, Marjorie whispered. After all those letters, all those promises. He sent his family to dispose of me like trash. That's the Garrett way, Agnes said, and there was an edge of bitterness in her voice. They think money gives them the right to treat people as less than human. Robert's the worst. Built his whole empire by crushing anyone in his path. Constance learned from him. James is just mean by nature. But Thomas, she sighed, Thomas might have been different if they'd let him be. The train whistle blew again. 2 minutes. Agnes stood. I wish I could offer you a place to stay, dear, but if the Garretts have marked you as unwelcome, anyone who helps you will pay for it. Robert owns half the businesses in this town. He can destroy a livelihood with a word. I understand, Marjorie said. And she did. This was how power worked, not through violence necessarily, but through the quiet, crushing pressure of economic control. Help the wrong person, and suddenly your credit at the general store disappears. Your husband loses his job. Your son's application to the bank gets denied. Small cruelties, easily justified, impossible to fight. Agnes pressed something into Marjorie's hand, a small cloth bundle. There's bread and cheese in there, and $2. It's not much, but I can't. Marjorie tried to give it back. Agnes closed Marjorie's fingers around the bundle. Yes, you can, because someone helped me once when I needed it. What goes around comes around, dear. You'll help someone else someday. She patted Marjorie's hand, then turned and walked down the aisle, disappearing out of the train car before Marjorie could even properly thank her. Marjorie clutched the bundle, fresh tears blurring her vision. $2 and some food. It might buy her another week in Omaha, maybe 2 if she was careful. Then what? The factories back east were overcrowded with desperate women. Domestic service required references she didn't have. The other options for a woman alone and penniless, she'd seen what became of those women. Gaunt faces in alleyway doorways, dead eyes. Bodies fished from the river when winter got too cold and hope ran out. The train lurched, beginning to move. Marjorie gripped the seat as the platform started sliding past her window. She watched the station drift away, watched James Garrett finally turn and walk toward his family's carriage. His duty done. Watched Hollow Creek shrink, all its promise and possibility evaporating like morning frost. Then she saw him. A man, standing at the far edge of the platform, half hidden in the shadow of the station building. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't looking at the train. He was looking at the Garrett's carriage, and even from a distance, even through her tears, Marjorie could see the rigid set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. The train picked up speed. The man turned, and for just a moment his eyes met hers through the window. Dark eyes, she thought. Serious. Angry, maybe. But not at her. The anger seemed directed elsewhere, like heat radiating toward the carriage rolling away down the street. Then the train rounded a curve, and he was gone. Marjorie sat back, exhaustion washing over her like a wave. Her head throbbed. Her throat was raw from suppressed sobs. Her arm ached where James had gripped it. Everything hurt, inside and out. She unwrapped Agnes's bundle. Inside was half a loaf of fresh bread, a generous wedge of cheese wrapped in wax paper, and $2 silver carefully folded into a scrap of paper. On the paper, in careful handwriting, "You deserve better than this." A.M. Marjorie bit into the bread. It was still slightly warm, probably baked that morning. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, and the simple goodness of it, butter and salt and yeast, made her want to weep all over again. How could people be so kind and so cruel in the same world, sometimes in the same town? The train carried her east, back toward everything she'd tried to escape. Through the window, Wyoming scrolled past. Endless plains, distant mountains, wide sky. It was beautiful, she realized. Harsh and cold, yes, but beautiful. She'd imagined herself here, bundled in a warm house with a fire crackling, maybe a dog at her feet, looking out at this landscape and feeling like she belonged somewhere. Foolish dreams. But as she ate Agnes's bread and watched the winter landscape blur past, something hardened inside Marjorie Hale. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. It was something darker, more useful, anger maybe, or the stubborn, mule-headed determination that had kept her alive after her mother died, that had sustained her through factory work and poverty and the daily grind of being powerless. The Garretts had humiliated her, yes. They'd treated her as something less than human. But she'd survived worse: her father's drinking, her mother's death, eviction, hunger, the casual cruelty of men who thought poverty made women available for their entertainment. She'd survived all of it, and she'd survived this too, somehow. The train rattled on, carrying her toward Omaha, toward uncertainty, toward a future that looked like nothing but darkness. But Marjorie made herself a promise as she sat in that cold train car, clutching a stranger's kindness. She would not disappear quietly. She would not let the Garretts be the end of her story. She would survive. And someday, somehow, she would matter to someone. She would be chosen, truly chosen, not as property or charity or pity, but as a person worthy of respect, even if she had to fight for every inch of that dignity herself. The train whistle blew again, long and lonely, as Hollow Creek vanished behind her into the white winter distance. And Marjorie Hale, unwanted mail-order bride, rejected cargo, disposable woman. Marjorie Hale closed her eyes and let herself rest, gathering strength for whatever came next. She didn't know it yet, but the train wouldn't carry her all the way to Omaha. She didn't know that the man with the dark eyes and rigid jaw would be mounting his horse right about now, riding hard to catch up to something that shouldn't be allowed to leave. She didn't know that her story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. But she would learn, soon. The horse beneath Colton Ward was breathing hard, steam pouring from its nostrils in the frozen air. He'd pushed the animal harder than he should have, riding out of Hollow Creek like the devil himself was giving chase. But it wasn't the devil behind him. It was his own conscience, that stubborn voice that wouldn't let him turn away from what he'd witnessed on the platform. He'd been in town for supplies, nothing more. A simple trip to pick up fence wire and nails, maybe stop by the general store for coffee and ammunition. He hadn't planned to linger. Colton Ward never lingered in Hollow Creek if he could help it. Too many people, too many eyes, too many questions about why a man his age, 32, wasn't married, wasn't part of the church socials, wasn't interested in being civilized the way the town fathers thought a man should be. But he'd heard the commotion on the platform, heard Constance Garrett's voice, sharp as broken glass, carrying across the winter air, and he'd turned against his better judgment to see what fresh cruelty the Garretts were inflicting on someone. What he'd seen made his blood run cold. A young woman, thin and shaking, being manhandled by James Garrett like she was livestock being loaded for slaughter. Her face pale with shock and wet with tears, her clothes poor but clean, her posture that of someone trying desperately to maintain dignity while the world stripped it away piece by piece. And the Garretts, all three of them, treating her like she was garbage that needed disposing. Colton had seen a lot in his life. He'd seen men shot over card games, seen cattle thieves hanged from cottonwood trees, seen winters so brutal they killed half the calves on every ranch in the territory. He'd learned early that life was hard and often unfair, that mercy was a luxury most people couldn't afford. But there was hard, and then there was cruel. And what the Garretts were doing crossed every line Colton had drawn for himself about when a man had to step in. He'd started toward the platform, but the train was already moving, already carrying the woman away. James Garrett stood watching it go with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face that Colton wanted to punch clean off. Constance was climbing into the family carriage, satisfied with her morning's work. Robert Garrett was lighting a cigar like nothing of consequence had happened at all. And the woman was disappearing, hauled away from whatever hope had brought her west, sent back to whatever desperate circumstances had made her answer a mail-order bride advertisement in the first place. Colton had returned to his horse, had loaded his supplies, had told himself it wasn't his business, wasn't his problem, wasn't his responsibility to fix every injustice he witnessed. But the image of her face wouldn't leave him. Those eyes, wide with shock and shame, those hands, trembling as they clutched her small satchel, the way she'd stumbled when James shoved her, and how she'd straightened her spine immediately after, refusing to fall even though everything else was falling apart around her. He'd made it 3 miles out of town before he'd turned his horse around and started riding east, following the train tracks. Now, an hour later, he could see it. The train, maybe a mile ahead, black smoke curling from its stack as it crawled through the winter landscape. The tracks ran straight through this stretch of territory, following the valley between two ranges of low hills. There was a water stop about 5 miles ahead, a place where the train would have to pause to refill its tanks. If Colton pushed hard enough, he might reach it before the train pulled out. Might. Maybe. Possibly. He leaned forward in the saddle, urging his mare faster. "Come on, girl, just a bit more." The mare responded, stretching into a gallop despite her exhaustion. Colton's ranch was small, 200 acres of difficult land that required constant work to be profitable. He ran maybe 50 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and he did all the work himself except during roundup when he hired a few hands. It wasn't much, but it was his, bought with money he'd saved working as a ranch hand for other men, built with his own sweat and stubbornness, and it had taught him the value of things that couldn't be bought. Independence. Self-respect. The right to make your own choices. That woman on the train, the Garretts had stolen all of that from her, had judged her, condemned her, and discarded her without giving her a chance to speak for herself, without caring that she was a human being with thoughts and feelings and rights. Colton didn't know her name, didn't know her story, didn't know if she was everything the Garretts claimed or nothing like it, but he knew injustice when he saw it, and he knew he couldn't ride away and still be able to look at himself in a mirror. The water stop came into view, a small wooden tower beside the tracks, with a platform and a tiny shack where the water tender lived. Colton could see the train approaching, its speed already decreasing. He pushed his mare harder, cutting across open ground to reach the platform before the train did. He made it with maybe 2 minutes to spare. The mare stumbled to a halt, sides heaving, and Colton swung down, his own breath coming hard. The water tender, an old man named Pike, who Colton knew vaguely from town, emerged from the shack with a pipe clamped between his teeth. "Ward," Pike said, surprised. "What are you doing out here?" "Need to board that train," Colton said. Pike squinted at him. "You got a ticket?" "No." "Can't board without a ticket." "Pike." Colton pulled $3 from his pocket, a significant portion of what he'd brought to town for supplies. "I need to talk to someone on that train. It's important." Pike looked at the money, then at Colton's face, and whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. "Talk fast. She only stops for 10 minutes. "That's all I need." The train pulled in with a screech of brakes and a hiss of steam. Pike moved to connect the water hose while Colton walked along the cars, looking through windows. The train was short, just 4 passenger cars and a freight car. Most of the cars were nearly empty, this late in the season. He found her in the third car, sitting alone near the back, staring out the window with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together through force of will alone. Colton climbed aboard. The conductor, a different man than the one who'd been at Hollow Creek, barely glanced at him. Colton walked down the aisle, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. She didn't look up until he was standing right beside her seat. Then her head turned and her eyes widened with recognition. The man from the platform, the one who'd been watching. Her face went pale with what looked like fear. "I'm not here to hurt you," Colton said quickly, removing his hat. "My name's Colton Ward. I saw what happened in Hollow Creek. I want to help." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion replacing fear. "Help how? Are you a friend of the Garretts?" "No, ma'am. I'm about the furthest thing from a friend of the Garretts you'll find in this territory." She studied his face for a long moment. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd thought, maybe 23 or 24. Her eyes were gray-green, red-rimmed from crying. Her hair was dark brown, pinned up but coming loose. There was a bruise forming on her upper arm where someone had grabbed her too hard. "Then why are you here?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Because what they did to you was wrong," Colton said simply. "And because I have a feeling you've got nowhere to go if this train takes you back east." Her jaw tightened and he saw her fighting back tears. "That's none of your concern." "Maybe not, but I'm making it my concern." He glanced toward the front of the car. The conductor was outside helping Pike with the water. They had maybe 8 minutes left. "Listen to me. I've got a ranch about 15 miles from Hollow Creek. It's small, nothing fancy, but it's got a house with a spare room. I'm there alone, no wife, no hands living on the property. You could stay there just until you figure out what you want to do next. No obligations. No expectations, just a safe place to catch your breath. She stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Why would you offer that to a stranger? Because someone should have made that offer 2 hours ago, and nobody did, Colton said. Because you came west hoping for a new start, and you deserve at least a chance at one. Because he stopped, searching for the right words. Because I can't stand by and watch someone get treated like they don't matter. I don't even know you, she whispered. For all I know, you're worse than the Garretts. That's fair, Colton acknowledged. You got no reason to trust me. But here's what I can tell you. My ranch is called the 3 Bars. Anyone in Hollow Creek can tell you where it is, tell you I'm a quiet man who keeps to himself. I don't drink much, don't gamble, don't frequent the saloon except for an occasional beer. I pay my debts, I keep my word, and I have never in my life raised a hand to a woman or taken advantage of someone weaker than me. She was still looking at him with those suspicious, wounded eyes. What do you want in return? Nothing? Nobody offers something for nothing. I do. He held her gaze. Look, I know what it's like to have nothing, to be desperate, to feel like the world's decided you don't matter. I've been there. Different circumstances maybe, but I've been there. Someone helped me once when I needed it. I'm just trying to pass that on. The conductor's whistle blew. 5 minutes. I can't ask you to... She started. You're not asking, Colton interrupted. I'm offering. There's a difference. He leaned forward slightly. What's your name? She hesitated, then said, Marjorie. Marjorie Hale. Marjorie, he repeated, and something about the way he said it, respectfully, like her name mattered, made her eyes well up again. I'm giving you a choice. You can stay on this train, go back east to whatever's waiting for you there, or you can take a chance on a stranger's kindness. Either way, the decision is yours. Nobody's forcing you. Nobody's pushing you. Your choice. Marjorie looked down at her hands, at the small cloth bundle Agnes Morrison had given her. $3 total to her name now. Maybe enough for a week in Omaha, then nothing. The factories wouldn't hire her without references. Domestic service was full of women more qualified and less desperate looking. The other options were too terrible to contemplate. But this man, this stranger, he could be lying, could be a predator looking for vulnerable women to exploit, could be insane, could be anything. Except there was something in his face, a steadiness, a quiet certainty. And his eyes, when he looked at her, didn't carry that calculating assessment she'd seen in so many men's eyes. He wasn't measuring her worth or imagining her weakness. He was just offering, genuinely offering. If I said yes, she said slowly, what would be expected of me? Nothing, Colton said again. Though if you wanted to cook or clean or help out, I wouldn't turn it down. The house is a bachelor's house, which means it's not as tidy as it could be. But that's not a requirement. That's just, if you wanted to feel useful. Mostly, I'd expect you to rest, recover, and think about what you want to do next. And when you figured that out, I'll help you do it, whether that's staying in Wyoming, going back east, or heading somewhere else entirely. 3-minute whistle. Marjorie's heart was pounding. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was possibly the stupidest decision she could make. But staying on this train meant certain poverty, probable starvation, and possible death before spring came. At least with this man, this Colton Ward, there was a chance. Maybe a slim chance, maybe a dangerous chance, but a chance nonetheless. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her satchel. All right. Colton blinked, clearly surprised she'd agreed. All right? Yes. Her voice was stronger now. I'll come with you. God help me, I'll come with you. Relief washed over his face. You won't regret this. I might, Marjorie said honestly, but I'll regret staying on this train more. Colton moved aside to let her into the aisle, and they walked toward the front of the car. The conductor was just climbing back aboard. He looked at them, confusion crossing his face. This lady's getting off here, Colton said. Sir, this isn't a regular stop. She's got a ticket to... She's changed her mind, Colton said firmly. That's allowed, isn't it? The conductor looked at Marjorie. Ma'am, are you leaving this train of your own free will? It was the same question he'd asked in Hollow Creek, but this time the answer was different. Yes, Marjorie said. I am. They stepped off the train just as the final whistle blew. Pike was disconnecting the water hose, and the conductor was waving his flag. The train lurched into motion, steam pouring from its stack. Marjorie stood on the small platform and watched it pull away. The second time in one day a train had left without her. But this time she'd chosen to stay. This time she was walking away instead of being pushed. Colton led her to his horse. The mare looked exhausted, sweat drying on her flanks despite the cold. "I rode her pretty hard getting here," Colton said apologetically. "We'll have to walk her back easy. Let her rest. It'll take a few hours to reach the ranch." "I can walk," Marjorie said. "Not in those boots, you can't." He glanced down at her feet. Her boots were worn thin, more hole than leather in places. "You'll freeze before we get halfway. You'll ride. I'll walk." "That's not—" "Miss Hale," he interrupted gently. "I've been walking behind horses my whole life. A few more hours won't kill me. You, on the other hand, look like you're about to fall over. You'll ride." Marjorie wanted to argue, but the truth was her legs were shaking and exhaustion was creeping through her bones like ice. "Thank you," she said quietly. Colton helped her into the saddle, and she settled herself as best she could. He took the reins and started walking, leading the mare east along a narrow trail that paralleled the tracks, but veered off toward the hills. Pike watched them go with a bemused expression, pipe smoke curling around his head. As they disappeared over the first rise, he shook his head and muttered, "Never seen Ward take an interest in anything but cattle and solitude. Wonder what that's about." The walk to the Three Bars Ranch took 3.5 hours. Colton kept the pace slow, careful not to stress his mare any further. Marjorie rode in silence for the first hour, her mind spinning with the enormity of what she'd just done. She'd gotten off a train to follow a stranger into the Wyoming wilderness. If something happened to her out here, no one would ever know. No one was left who would even care. "Tell me about yourself," Colton said eventually, breaking the silence. "Where are you from originally?" "Philadelphia," Marjorie said. "Born and raised." "Never been east," Colton said. "Heard it's crowded." "Very." Marjorie watched his back as he walked, the steady, patient way he moved. "Where are you from?" "Texas originally, came north about 10 years ago looking for work. Found it on the big ranches, saved my money, bought my own place 5 years back." He glanced over his shoulder. "It's not much, like I said, but it's mine." "That must be a good feeling." "It is." He paused. "Can I ask you something?" "I suppose." "What did the Garretts say you lied about in your letters?" Marjorie felt her face heat with shame. "I didn't lie. I didn't advertise how poor I was. I said my father was a craftsman, which was true. He was a woodworker before the drink ruined him. I said my family had fallen on hard times, which was true. I worked in a textile factory, which I mentioned, but I didn't spell out that we lived in the tenements, that my mother took in sewing to keep us fed, that my father died in a gutter fight. The Garretts decided that omission was the same as lying." "It's not," Colton said flatly. "It's just not volunteering information that would have gotten your letters thrown in the trash. That's called trying to survive." "They called me a con artist." "The Garretts would call Jesus Christ a con artist if he showed up without a bank account," Colton said, and there was real anger in his voice. "They're the worst kind of people, the kind who think money makes them better than everyone else, who think poverty is a moral failing instead of a circumstance. Don't listen to anything they said about you." Marjorie felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of shame she'd been carrying since the platform. "You don't even know me. How can you be sure they were wrong?" "Because I saw your face," Colton said simply. "I saw genuine shock and hurt, not the face of someone who got caught running a scam. Liars don't cry like you were crying. They get angry, defensive. You looked like someone who'd been gutted. That's not deception. That's betrayal." They walked in silence for a while longer. The landscape was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. Rolling hills covered in brown grass, patches of snow in the shadows, bare cottonwoods along the creek beds. Hawks circled overhead. In the distance, a small herd of pronghorn antelope bounded across a ridge. "It's so empty," Marjorie said quietly. "That's why I like it," Colton replied. "Out here, a man's worth isn't measured by his bank account or his family name. It's measured by whether he can survive, whether he keeps his word, whether he helps his neighbors when they need it. It's simpler, more honest. Is it lonely? He considered. Sometimes. But I'll take honest loneliness over dishonest company any day. As they crested a long rise, Colton pointed ahead. There. That's the 3 bars. Marjorie followed his gesture and saw a small valley nestled between 2 hills. A creek ran through it, frozen at the edges but still flowing in the middle. There was a house, log construction, single story, with a stone chimney from which smoke curled. Near it stood a barn, a corral, and a few smaller outbuildings. Cattle dotted the hillsides, dark shapes against the pale grass. It was small, like he'd said, but it looked solid, real, permanent. It's nice, Marjorie said, and meant it. It keeps the wind out, Colton said, but she heard the pride underneath the modesty. They descended into the valley. As they approached the house, a large dog came bounding out, some mix of shepherd and wolf, with pale eyes and a thick coat. It barked once, saw Colton, and immediately started wagging its entire back half. That's Ghost, Colton said. She looks mean, but she's friendly as can be. Ghost, this is Marjorie. Be nice. The dog sniffed Marjorie's boots, decided she was acceptable, and immediately flopped over for belly rubs. She's beautiful, Marjorie said, reaching down to scratch the dog's stomach. The simple normalcy of it, petting a dog, made her want to cry again. Colton helped her down from the horse, then led the mare to the barn. Make yourself at home, he called over his shoulder. Door's unlocked. I'll be in after I take care of the horse. Marjorie approached the house hesitantly. The door opened easily, and she stepped into warmth. The interior was exactly what she'd expected from a bachelor rancher, functional but sparse. A large main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a fire burning low. There was a wooden table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the fire, shelves holding supplies and a few books. Everything was dusty, but not filthy, lived in, but not slovenly. 2 doors led off the main room. Marjorie peeked through one and saw a bedroom, Colton's, clearly, with a simple bed and a trunk at its foot. The other door revealed a smaller room with another bed, currently bare of linens but otherwise clean. She returned to the main room just as Colton came in, stamping snow from his boots. Ghost followed him, immediately curling up near the fire. It's not much, he said again, and this time the vulnerability in his voice was clear. He cared what she thought. It's wonderful, Marjorie said honestly. It's warm and safe and solid. That's more than I've had in a very long time. Relief crossed his face. Good. That's good. He moved to the fireplace, adding wood. I'll get bedding for your room. Get a fire going in there so it warms up. You hungry? I am, Marjorie admitted. But I can cook. You've done enough. You sure? I'm sure. She looked around the kitchen area. What do you have? Venison from a deer I shot last week, potatoes, onions, some canned tomatoes, flour and cornmeal, coffee. He paused. I'm not much of a cook. I mostly just fry things or make stew. Stew sounds perfect, Marjorie said. And it did. Honest, simple food for an honest, simple place. While Colton went to prepare her room, Marjorie explored the kitchen. She found a large pot, a sharp knife, a cutting board. The venison was stored in a cold box on the north side of the house. She cut several pounds into chunks. The vegetables were in a root cellar accessed through a trap door. She selected potatoes and onions, marveling at how well stocked everything was. She worked methodically, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of cooking, chopping vegetables, browning meat, building layers of flavor. It was something she was good at, something useful, something that made her feel human again instead of like unwanted cargo. By the time Colton returned, the stew was simmering and the house smelled like food and comfort. Smells incredible, he said, surprised. It's just stew, Marjorie said, but she was pleased. My stew never smells like that. He washed his hands in a basin. Your room's ready. Fire's going. Should be warm in an hour or so. They ate at the table, the stew between them in the pot, each with a bowl and a spoon. It was good, rich and hearty, the meat tender, the vegetables soft. They ate in companionable silence for a while. Finally, Marjorie set down her spoon and looked at him directly. Why did you really help me? Colton met her eyes. I told you, because it was the right thing to do. People don't usually do the right thing. Maybe not. He pushed his bowl aside. But here's the truth. 6 years ago, I was working on a ranch over in Montana. There was an accident. A horse threw me, I hit my head, got a bad fever from infection, should have died. The rancher I worked for, he would have just sent me into town to die alone. But one of the other hands, a man named Joseph, he took care of me. Sat up nights keeping me cool, making sure I ate, changing my bandages. He saved my life. Where is he now? Marjorie asked. Dead, Colton said quietly. The following winter. Froze to death when he got caught in a blizzard trying to bring in strays. He looked down at his hands. Before he died, though, he told me something. He said, "When you get the chance, you help someone the way I helped you. That's how goodness survives in this world, one person at a time." Marjorie felt tears pricking her eyes again. "I'm sorry about your friend." "Me too." Colton looked up. "But I made him a promise. And today, when I saw you on that platform, I knew this was the chance. This was when I kept that promise." They sat in silence, the fire crackling, ghosts snoring softly. Outside, the winter night had fallen, cold and clear. "Thank you," Marjorie said softly, "for keeping your promise, for choosing me when nobody else would." "You're welcome," Colton said. And then, carefully, "You're safe here, Marjorie, for as long as you need. I give you my word." And looking into his steady, honest eyes, Marjorie realized something extraordinary. She believed him. The first week passed in a strange, tentative peace. Marjorie woke each morning in the small bedroom that had become hers, wrapped in warm quilts Colton had pulled from a trunk that had belonged to his mother. She'd lie there for a few moments, listening to the sounds of the ranch, Colton moving in the main room, stoking the fire, the soft whine of Ghost begging for breakfast, the distant lowing of cattle. Sounds that meant safety, routine, normalcy. She'd rise, dress in one of her 3 dresses, and emerge to find Colton already working. He'd tip his hat to her, ask if she'd slept well, then head out to do whatever the day's work required. And Marjorie, left alone in the warm house, would set about making herself useful in the only way she knew how. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended Colton's shirts where they'd torn on fence wire. She organized the chaotic shelves, swept floors that probably hadn't seen a broom in months, washed windows until the winter light streamed through clear and bright. She found a strange comfort in the work, not because it was required, but because it was chosen. Every task she completed was a small act of reclaiming herself, of proving she had value beyond what anyone else decided. Colton never asked her to do any of it. In fact, the first time he came in to find his shirts mended and hanging neatly on pegs, he looked almost embarrassed. "You didn't have to do that," he said, fingering the careful stitches on a torn sleeve. "I wanted to," Marjorie replied. "You've given me so much. Let me give something back." "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said, and met his eyes. "That's why I want to." He'd nodded slowly, accepting the distinction, and that had been the end of the discussion. But on the 8th day, their fragile peace shattered. Marjorie was in the kitchen, elbow-deep in bread dough, when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses moving fast. Ghost's head came up from where she'd been dozing by the fire, and a low growl rumbled in her chest. Colton was out in the barn. Marjorie wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window, peering out. 3 riders were approaching the house, and even from a distance she recognized them. Her stomach dropped like a stone into icy water. James Garrett sat in the middle, flanked by 2 men Marjorie didn't know. Ranch hands, probably. Hard-faced men with guns on their hips. They pulled up in front of the house in a cloud of dust, and James dismounted with the casual arrogance of someone who believed the entire world belonged to him. Marjorie stepped back from the window, her heart hammering. She heard Colton emerge from the barn, heard his boots on the frozen ground. "Garrett," Colton's voice carried through the walls. "What do you want?" "You know what I want, Ward." James's voice was sharp with anger. "We heard you got yourself a house guest. Heard it's the same lying bride who tried to trap my brother." Marjorie moved to the door, pressing her ear against it. "Miss Hale is under my protection," Colton said, his tone flat and dangerous. "She's staying here of her own free will. That's all you need to know." "The hell it is," James's voice rose. "That woman came here under false pretenses. She's a con artist, and you're harboring her. Probably planning to marry her yourself now that my fool brother's seen sense. I'm not planning anything except minding my own business, Colton said, which is what you should do. Ride on back to town, James. There's nothing for you here. I'll decide that. James started toward the house. Colton moved to block him. No, you won't. This is my land. You're not welcome on it, and you're sure as hell not welcome in my house. You protecting a whore now, Ward? One of the ranch hands sneered. That what you've come to? Marjorie flinched at the word. She'd been called worse in her life, but somehow hearing it here in this place that had felt safe cut deeper than expected. Watch your mouth, Colton said, and there was something in his voice that made Marjorie's breath catch. Pure, cold fury, barely leashed. Or what? James pushed closer. You'll fight me? You and what army, Ward? You're one man out here alone. We're three. And if we decide that woman needs to come with us, then you'll have to go through me, Colton said quietly. And I promise you, James, that's not going to end the way you think it will. Marjorie couldn't stand it anymore. She threw open the door and stepped onto the porch, her chin up despite the fear turning her legs to water. I'm not going anywhere with you. James's eyes locked on her, and the contempt in them was visceral. There she is, the little gold digger herself. I'm not a gold digger, Marjorie said, forcing her voice steady. I answered an advertisement in good faith. I corresponded honestly. Your family decided I wasn't good enough, which is their right, but I don't owe you anything, and you have no authority over me. You made my family look like fools, James spat. Coming out here, making Thomas think he was getting a lady, when you're nothing but Irish trash from the slums. My mother was Irish, yes, Marjorie said, and something fierce was rising in her chest now, burning away the fear. She was also the finest woman I've ever known. She worked herself to death keeping me fed and clothed and educated. Don't you dare use her heritage as an insult in front of me. Marjorie, Colton said quietly. A warning. But Marjorie couldn't stop. Weeks of humiliation, of shame, of being treated as less than human, it all came pouring out. You want to know the truth, Mr. Garrett? I never wanted your brother. I wanted security. I wanted a roof over my head and food in my belly, and the chance to not die alone in some factory or alley. I was honest about who I was and where I came from. If your family was too proud to accept that, that's their failing, not mine. You lied, James started. I omitted, Marjorie cut him off, because I knew people like you would judge me for circumstances beyond my control. My father's drinking, my mother's death, the poverty that came after. Those things don't make me a liar. They make me a survivor. James's face had gone red with rage. You think you can talk to me like that? You think because Ward's taken pity on you that you matter now? I think I matter because I'm a human being, Marjorie said, which is more than you've ever treated me as. James took a step forward, and Colton immediately moved between them. That's far enough. Move, Ward. No. The two men stood facing each other, and the tension was so thick Marjorie could barely breathe. The two ranch hands had dismounted now, hands hovering near their guns. Ghost had come to stand beside Colton, hackles raised, teeth bared. You're making a mistake, James said. My family has influence in this territory. We can make your life very difficult. You can try, Colton said. But I've been making my own way for a long time, Garrett. I don't owe your family anything. I don't need their business or their goodwill, and I sure as hell don't need their permission to offer shelter to someone who needs it. She's poison, James hissed. She'll ruin you the way she tried to ruin Thomas. Thomas is a grown man who let his sister and father make his decisions for him, Colton shot back. If he's ruined, it's because he's got no spine, not because Miss Hale answered his advertisement. James's hand moved toward his gun. Marjorie's heart stopped. But Colton was faster. His own hand went to his hip, and suddenly a revolver was pointed directly at James's chest. Don't, Colton said softly. Whatever you're thinking, don't. The ranch hands tensed, reaching for their own weapons. But Colton's gun never wavered. Tell your boys to keep their hands where I can see them, James. I'd hate for this to turn into something we all regret. For a long moment, nobody moved. The winter wind moaned across the valley. A crow called from somewhere in the distance. Ghost's growl was a constant, low rumble. Then James raised his hand slightly, stepping back. Stand down, he told his men. To Colton, he said, "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Colton replied. "You came to my land uninvited. You threatened someone under my protection. You drew on me first. By rights, I could shoot all three of you and claim self-defense, and you know it. So here's how this ends. You ride away, now. And you don't come back, ever." "The Garretts own this territory," James said. "You don't own me," Colton said. "And you don't own her. Now get off my land before I decide defending her honor is worth whatever trouble your family can cause me." James stared at him for another long moment, then turned and mounted his horse. His men followed suit. As they wheeled away, James called back, "You'll regret this, Ward, both of you." They galloped off, disappearing over the ridge. Colton stood watching until they were completely gone, his gun still in his hand. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded entirely did he lower the weapon and turn to Marjorie. She was shaking, she realized, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should never have come here. I brought trouble to your door." "Stop," Colton said firmly. He holstered his gun and climbed the porch steps. "You didn't bring trouble. The Garretts brought trouble because that's what they do. They're bullies, Marjorie. They've been bullies since Robert Garrett first came to this territory 20 years ago. But they don't run the whole world, no matter what they think." "But they can hurt you," Marjorie said. "You said they have influence." "They do," Colton acknowledged. "But influence only works if you need something from the people who have it. I don't need anything from the Garretts. My ranch is paid for. I don't borrow money. I sell my cattle to buyers out of Cheyenne, not through the local auction. The only thing they could hurt is my reputation. And honestly, my reputation was never that great to begin with." Despite everything, Marjorie almost laughed. "Why not?" "Because I keep to myself. Don't go to church. Don't socialize. Don't play the game of pretending to respect people I don't respect." He looked at her seriously. "The Garretts have always hated that I won't bow and scrape to them. This just gives them a reason to make that hate public. But I was never going to bow to them, Marjorie. Not for you. Not for anyone. That's not who I am." "Who are you?" Marjorie asked quietly. Colton considered the question. "I'm a man who believes people should be judged by their character, not their bank account. Who thinks hard work and honesty matter more than family name or social standing? Who'd rather be alone than compromise my principles for acceptance?" He met her eyes. "And I'm a man who meant what he said on that train platform. You're under my protection. Anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through me first." Marjorie felt something breaking open in her chest, something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Trust, maybe. Or hope. Or just the simple, overwhelming relief of not being alone. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" "Because Joseph taught me that goodness survives one person at a time," Colton said. "Because I saw you being treated like you didn't matter, and I couldn't stand by and let that happen. Because—" He stopped, searching for words. "Because you deserve better than what this world's given you. And if I can provide that even for a little while, then I'm going to do it." Marjorie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to repay—" "You don't repay kindness," Colton interrupted gently. "You accept it. You let it change you. And someday, when you have the chance, you pass it on to someone else who needs it. That's how it works." They stood on the porch, the winter sun breaking through clouds overhead, casting long shadows across the valley. Ghost pressed against Marjorie's leg, offering silent comfort. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that train in Hollow Creek, Marjorie felt something like peace. But the peace was fragile, and they both knew it. That night, over dinner, they talked about what would happen next. Colton was pragmatic, laying out the realities of the situation with the same straightforward honesty he applied to everything. "James will go back to his family," he said. "They'll be angry. Robert Garrett doesn't like being defied, and Constance Garrett definitely doesn't like being proven wrong about anything. They'll look for ways to make trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Marjorie asked. "Hard to say. They could spread rumors about you, about us, in town, could try to make it difficult for me to do business, could even try to get the sheriff involved, claim I'm harboring a fugitive or some such nonsense." He took a sip of coffee. "But none of that will work because you haven't broken any laws, and neither have I." We're two adults making our own choices on private property. What if they come back? Marjorie's voice was small. What if they bring more men? Then I'll deal with it, Colton said. But I don't think they will. The Garretts are bullies, like I said, but they're not stupid. They know if they escalate this into actual violence, they'll lose the sympathy of the other ranchers in the area. Men out here might not like me much, but they respect property rights and a man's right to defend his home. If the Garretts come onto my land with guns drawn, word will spread, and that'll hurt them more than it hurts me. Marjorie traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. I never wanted to cause problems for anyone. You didn't cause anything, Colton said firmly. The Garretts caused problems by treating you like property instead of a person. Everything that's happened since then is just consequences of their choices, not yours. Do you really believe that? I do. He leaned back in his chair. Look, Marjorie, I know you've been told your whole life that you don't matter, that you're poor so you're worthless, that you're a woman so you're powerless, that you should be grateful for whatever scraps men like the Garretts are willing to throw you. But that's a lie. You're a person with rights and dignity and worth. And anyone who can't see that is blind. Marjorie felt tears threatening again. How can you be so sure? You barely know me. I know enough, Colton said. I know you traveled halfway across the country on faith. I know you tried to make an honest life for yourself. I know you stood up to James Garrett today, even though you were terrified. I know you cook meals that make this house feel like a home. I know you mended my shirts with stitches so fine they're almost invisible. I know Ghost likes you, and Ghost is a good judge of character. As if on cue, the dog thumped her tail. That's enough for me. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling, darkness pressing against the windows. Finally, Marjorie said, What happens now? Long term, I mean. I can't stay here forever. Why not? Colton asked. Marjorie blinked. Because I'm a burden. Because you didn't ask for a permanent house guest. Because people will talk. People already are talking, Colton said, and I don't particularly care what they say. As for being a burden, you're not. This ranch runs better with you here. I eat real food instead of burnt meat and stale bread. My clothes are mended. The house is clean. Hell, I actually look forward to coming inside at the end of the day, which is new. He paused. I'm not asking you to stay forever, Marjorie. That's your choice. But I'm saying if you wanted to stay, you'd be welcome. More than welcome. As what? Marjorie asked carefully. As hired help? As charity? As... She couldn't finish the question, but Colton understood it. As whatever you want to be, he said. If you want to stay as a hired housekeeper with wages, we can do that. If you want to stay as a friend who helps out in exchange for room and board, we can do that. If you eventually wanted something else... He trailed off, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. Well, we could discuss that when and if you wanted to. Marjorie's heart was beating fast. Something else like what? Colton met her eyes. Like a partnership. Like two people building a life together because they choose to, not because they have to. Like... He stopped, shook his head. I'm getting ahead of myself. You've been here a week. You've got no reason to think of me as anything but the stranger who took you in. I just want you to know that you have options, Marjorie. Real options. Not just the choice between poverty and desperation. I think, Marjorie started, then stopped. What did she think? A week ago, she'd been on a train heading back to certain destitution. Now she was sitting in a warm house with a man who looked at her like she mattered, who defended her against bullies, who offered her not just shelter but dignity. It was too much, too fast. But it was also real. More real than any of the pretty words Thomas Garrett had written in his letters. I think I need time, she finally said, to figure out who I am when I'm not desperate, to understand what I want versus what I think I should want, to know if what I'm feeling is gratitude or something more. That's fair, Colton said. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Later that night, lying in her small bed, Marjorie stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of the tangled emotions in her chest. Fear, certainly. Fear of the Garretts, fear of the future. Fear of making another mistake. But also something warmer, something that felt dangerous to name. When Colton had stood between her and James, gun drawn, protecting her without hesitation, she'd felt something shift inside her. When he'd said she deserved better, when he'd looked at her like she was worth defending, something had cracked open. She didn't know if it was love. She didn't know if she was even capable of love after everything she'd been through. But she knew that when Colton walked into a room, she felt safer. When he spoke, she listened. When he smiled, rare as that was, her heart did something strange and fluttery that she hadn't felt since she was a girl reading romance novels borrowed from neighbors. Was that real, or was it just desperation wearing a prettier face? She didn't know. But for the first time in her life, she had the luxury of time to figure it out. In the main room, Colton sat by the fire, ghost's head in his lap, thinking his own thoughts. He'd surprised himself today. He'd drawn a gun on James Garrett, risked making enemies of the most powerful family in the territory, all for a woman he'd known for 8 days. It should have felt reckless. Instead, it felt right. He'd meant what he said. He didn't need the Garrett's approval or goodwill. But the truth was more complicated. He'd spent 5 years building this ranch, creating a life of quiet independence. He told himself he was content alone, that he didn't need companionship or connection, and mostly, that had been true. But then he'd seen Marjorie on that platform, seen the way she held herself together even as the world fell apart around her, and something in him had recognized something in her. Strength, maybe. Or just the stubborn refusal to disappear quietly. Whatever it was, it had called to him in a way nothing else ever had. He wasn't fool enough to call it love. Not yet. But it was something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. Outside, the winter stars blazed cold and bright. The wind carried the scent of snow. And in the small ranch house in the valley, 2 people who'd been alone for too long lay awake in separate rooms, each wondering if maybe, just maybe, they'd found something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. The chance to choose their own future. Together or apart, but freely. And that chance, fragile as it was, felt like the most precious thing in the world. 3 weeks passed, and winter deepened its grip on the valley. Snow fell in earnest now, blanketing the hills in white, turning the world quiet and pristine. Colton worked from dawn until dark, breaking ice on water troughs, hauling hay to the cattle, mending fence line that had weakened under the weight of snow. Marjorie watched him from the kitchen window, watched the way he moved through the brutal cold with steady determination, never complaining, never faltering. She'd found her own rhythm in those weeks, up before dawn to start the fire and put coffee on. Breakfast ready when Colton came in from his first round of chores, his face red with cold, his hands stiff until the warmth brought feeling back. She'd pack him food for midday, thick sandwiches, hard-boiled eggs, cornbread wrapped in cloth. When he returned at dusk, exhausted and silent, she'd have dinner waiting and hot water for washing. They'd eat together, talk quietly about small things, the weather, the cattle, Ghost's antics chasing rabbits through the snow. Then Colton would retreat to his room, and Marjorie to hers, and the house would settle into peaceful quiet. It was domestic, simple, and Marjorie found herself craving it in a way that frightened her. This wasn't supposed to be permanent. This was temporary shelter, a way station while she figured out her next move. But with each passing day, the idea of leaving felt less like freedom and more like loss. She hadn't heard anything from the Garretts since that confrontation. No riders had appeared. No threats had materialized. It was as if they'd decided she wasn't worth the effort, and Marjorie told herself she was relieved. But there was an edge of unease she couldn't shake, a feeling that silence wasn't the same as safety. Colton felt it too, though he didn't speak of it. But Marjorie noticed the way he checked the rifle by the door each night, the way his eyes scanned the ridgeline when he was out working, the way he kept Ghost close instead of letting her roam as he usually did. He was waiting for something. They both were. The storm that brought everything to a head arrived on a Tuesday morning, rolling down from the mountains with apocalyptic fury. Marjorie woke to howling wind and snow so thick she couldn't see the barn from the house. Colton was already up, dressed in his heaviest coat, pulling on gloves. "Stay inside, Mus," he told her. "This is going to be bad. I need to get the cattle into the shelter of the south pasture and make sure the barn's secure." "Let me help," Marjorie said. "No." His voice was firm. You don't know the land well enough. You could get turned around in this, and I wouldn't be able to find you. Stay here. Keep the fire going. I'll be back as soon as I can. Colton, he turned, and the look in his eyes stopped her protest. Please, Marjorie, I need to know you're safe. I can't do what needs doing if I'm worried about you. She nodded reluctantly. Be careful. Always am. He pulled his hat low and stepped out into the storm, Ghost at his heels. The wind slammed the door shut behind him, and Marjorie was left alone in the sudden silence. She kept herself busy, fed the fire, made bread, mended a torn blanket. But as the hours crawled past and the storm intensified, worry began to gnaw at her. Colton had said he'd be back as soon as he could, but it had been 4 hours now, maybe 5. The windows were completely obscured by snow. The wind screamed like something alive and furious. By early afternoon, Marjorie was pacing, unable to sit still. What if something had happened? What if he'd been thrown by his horse or gotten lost in the whiteout or been injured somehow? What if he was out there freezing to death while she sat here safe and warm? She was about to do something stupid, put on her inadequate coat and go looking for him, when the door burst open. Colton stumbled in, covered head to toe in snow, Ghost behind him looking like a white ghost herself. He was shaking violently, his lips blue, ice crusted in his beard. Colton! Marjorie rushed to him, helping him out of his frozen coat. My God, you're freezing. How long were you out there? 6 hours, maybe. He managed through chattering teeth. Lost 3 calves. Got the rest to shelter. Barn secure. But I got turned around coming back. Couldn't see 3 feet. Had to trust Ghost to find the house. Marjorie was already pulling him toward the fire, stripping off his gloves to reveal hands that were dangerously pale. You need to warm up slowly. Sit here. She grabbed blankets from her room, wrapped them around his shoulders. I'll make hot broth. I'm fine, Colton protested, but his shaking gave the lie to his words. You're half frozen, Marjorie said sharply. Sit still and let me take care of you for once. She worked quickly, heating broth she'd made the day before, adding whiskey to warm him from the inside. She knelt beside him and rubbed his hands between hers, trying to restore circulation. His fingers were like ice, barely moving. You shouldn't have stayed out so long, she said, and there was anger in her voice, anger born of fear. You could have died out there. The cattle? Damn the cattle, Marjorie snapped. What good are they if you're dead? Colton looked at her, surprised by her vehemence. Marjorie? Don't Marjorie me. Her hands were shaking now too, but not from cold. Do you know what it was like sitting here, not knowing if you were safe, not knowing if you'd come back? I've lost everyone I've ever cared about, and She stopped abruptly, realizing what she'd just revealed. The silence between them was suddenly charged with something neither of them had named yet. You care about me, Colton said quietly. It wasn't a question. Marjorie looked down at their joined hands. Yes, I care about you. More than I should, probably, considering I've only known you 3 weeks. But yes. Marjorie. He waited until she looked up, met his eyes. I care about you too. Have since the day I saw you on that platform. Why do you think I rode so hard to catch that train? Because you're a good man who helps people, Marjorie said. That's part of it, Colton agreed. But it's not all of it. I saw you, and something in me knew I couldn't let you disappear. Knew I needed you to stay. He paused. I've been alone for a long time, Marjorie. Thought I was content that way. But these past weeks, with you here, this house feels different. Feels like a home instead of just a place I sleep. Colton, A heavy knock on the door interrupted whatever she'd been about to say. They both froze. Ghost, who'd been lying by the fire, scrambled to her feet with a low growl. Stay here, Colton said, standing. He crossed to the door, Marjorie right behind him despite his instruction. He opened it to reveal Agnes Morrison, the woman from the boarding house, standing on the porch covered in snow. Her face was grim. Mrs. Morrison, Colton said, surprised. What are you doing out in this storm? I had to warn you, Agnes said, stepping inside. May I? Of course. Colton shut the door against the wind. What's wrong? Agnes looked between them, her expression troubled. The Garretts are planning something. I have a boarder, young man who works at their ranch. He came to me last night, drunk and guilty, Said Robert Garrett's been meeting with the territorial judge. They're trying to build a case to have Miss Hale arrested. Marjorie's stomach dropped. Arrested? For what? Fraud, theft of services, breach of contract. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, Agnes said. The judge is in the Garrett's pocket, has been for years. If they get him to issue a warrant, the sheriff will have to act on it. There's no basis for any of that, Colton said angrily. Marjorie hasn't committed any crime. Doesn't matter if it's true, Agnes replied. What matters is whether they can make it stick long enough to humiliate her, drag her through legal proceedings, maybe even get her thrown in jail for a few weeks. By the time the truth comes out, the damage will be done. Marjorie sank into a chair, feeling the walls closing in. They won't stop. They'll never stop. There's more, Agnes said quietly. They're also spreading rumors about you, Mr. Ward, saying you're living in sin with Miss Hale, saying you're keeping her here against her will. Some of the more righteous types in town are getting worked up about it. Let them talk, Colton said dismissively. It's not just talk, Agnes said. Robert Garrett's been buying up debts, calling in favors. He's trying to isolate you, make it so no one will do business with you. And if he can get enough people believing you're a bad man, well, she spread her hands. Vigilante justice isn't unheard of out here. The room fell silent, except for the howling wind. Marjorie felt her carefully built sense of safety crumbling. She should have known, should have realized the Garretts wouldn't just let her go. People like them never did. I should leave, she said quietly. This was always going to happen. I should just go before they destroy you completely. No. Colton's voice was flat, absolute. Colton, they're trying to ruin you because of me. Let them try, he said. I'm not sending you away to face trumped-up charges alone. I'm not letting the Garretts win. But if I stay, you'll lose everything. I'll lose more if you go, Colton said, and the raw honesty in his voice made Marjorie's breath catch. I've lived without a lot of things, Marjorie. Money, friends, comfort. I can live without all of that. But I don't want to live without you. Agnes cleared her throat. There might be another option. They both turned to her. What option? Marjorie asked. Marriage, Agnes said bluntly. If you two were married, it would undercut most of the Garrett's accusations. Can't live in sin if you're wed. Can't claim she's being held against her will if she's your legal wife. And it would give you both the protection of a legitimate union. Marjorie's heart was pounding. That's not... We barely know each other. You know each other better than most couples who marry, Agnes said practically. You've lived together for 3 weeks. You've seen each other at worst and best. That's more than most brides and grooms can say. But marriage is... Marjorie looked at Colton helplessly. It's forever. It's binding. I won't trap you into something you don't want just to save myself from the Garretts. Colton crossed to her, knelt beside her chair so they were eye level. Look at me, Marjorie. She did, and his eyes were steady, serious, and something more. Something warm that made her chest ache. I'm not a man who says things I don't mean. When I offered you protection, I meant it completely. When I said I care about you, I meant that too. And if marrying you is what it takes to keep you safe, to give you the security and standing you deserve, then I'd be honored to make you my wife. But you don't love me, Marjorie whispered. And I don't know if I love you yet, Colton said honestly, but I know I could. I know that every day you're here, I find new reasons to admire you, your strength, your kindness, your stubbornness, the way you sing when you think no one's listening, the way you mend things so carefully, like every stitch matters, the way you look at the mountains with wonder even in the dead of winter. He took her hands. I know that I want to wake up and find you in my kitchen every morning. I know that I want to protect you, provide for you, build a life with you. If that's not love yet, it's close enough that I'm willing to bet it'll get there. Tears were streaming down Marjorie's face. What if it doesn't? What if we're making a mistake? Then we'll unmake it, Colton said. But I don't think we are. I think we're both tired of being alone. I think we both know what it's like to be unwanted and unvalued. And I think we see in each other something worth choosing. Not out of desperation, not out of necessity, but because we recognize something real. Marjorie looked at Agnes, who was watching with soft eyes. What do you think? I think you'd be a fool to let a man like this go, Agnes said. I think the Garretts have taken enough from you already, and I think sometimes the best marriages start not with passion, but with respect and partnership. The rest can grow. Marjorie turned back to Colton. He was still kneeling, still holding her hands, still looking at her with those steady, honest eyes. She thought about the past 3 weeks, thought about the safety she'd felt here, the peace, the simple domesticity that had somehow become precious. Thought about this morning when she'd been terrified he wouldn't come back from the storm, when she'd realized that somewhere along the way, this man had become essential to her. It wasn't the grand passion of storybooks. It wasn't the desperate romance she'd once dreamed about. But it was real, solid, built on mutual respect and genuine care, and maybe that was worth more than all the pretty words Thomas Garrett had written in his letters. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll marry you." Colton's face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen from him. "Yeah?" "Yeah." She found herself smiling back through her tears. "But on one condition." "Name it." "We do this right. I won't have people saying I trapped you or you took advantage of me. We have a proper wedding. We make vows in front of witnesses. We do this so everyone knows it's real and freely chosen." "Done," Colton said immediately. He stood, pulling her up with him, and for a moment they just stood there, hands clasped, looking at each other like they were seeing something neither had expected to find. Agnes was smiling now too. "Well then, I suppose we have a wedding to plan. The minister in town might not be willing, given the Garrett's influence, but I know a traveling preacher who passes through every few weeks. Good man. Doesn't bow to political pressure." "When?" Marjorie asked. "He should be here by the end of the week, storm permitting," Agnes said. "I'll get word to him. We can do it at my boarding house, neutral ground and big enough for witnesses." She paused. "You'll need a dress." "I have dresses," Marjorie said. "You need a wedding dress," Agnes said firmly. "Something that makes you feel like a bride, not like someone settling for scraps. I have fabric. I can sew. Give me 3 days." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Agnes said. "You deserve to feel beautiful on your wedding day, Marjorie. After everything you've been through, you deserve that much." The storm raged outside, but inside the small ranch house, something bright and warm was blooming. Marjorie looked at Colton, at this man who'd chosen her when no one else would, who'd defended her, protected her, valued her. He wasn't perfect. He was quiet and stubborn, and probably too independent for his own good. But he was good. Genuinely, bone-deep good. And he was offering her not just shelter, but partnership. Not just protection, but respect. "I'll make you a good wife," she said. "You already do," Colton replied. "You already make this place a home." Agnes bustled around gathering her things, preparing to brave the storm back to town. "I'll spread the word, quietly, to people I trust. We'll have witnesses. We'll make this official, in public. The Garretts won't be able to claim anything improper." "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison," Marjorie said. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." "You don't repay it," Agnes said, echoing Colton's words from weeks ago. "You accept it, and someday you pass it on." She pulled on her coat. "Besides, I've never liked the Garretts. Watching them get outmaneuvered by a good woman and an honest man will be payment enough." After Agnes left, fighting her way back through the blizzard with a determination that belied her age, Marjorie and Colton stood by the fire, the weight of their decision settling over them. "Are you scared?" Colton asked. "Terrified," Marjorie admitted. "But not of you. I'm scared of hoping again. I'm scared of believing this is real. I'm scared that I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream." "It's real," Colton said. He reached out tentatively, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm real. This is happening. And I promise you, Marjorie, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the choice you're making." "You already are," she said softly. And then, because the moment called for it, because something in her chest demanded it, she stepped forward and kissed him. It was brief, chaste, more promise than passion. But when they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Well then," Colton said, a bit breathlessly, "I guess we're really doing this." "I guess we are," Marjorie agreed. Outside, the storm continued its fury, But inside, two people who'd been cast aside by the world had found each other. Two people who'd been told they didn't matter had chosen to matter to each other. Two people who'd survived more than anyone should have to survive had decided to stop just surviving and start living. It wasn't the fairy tale Marjorie had dreamed of as a girl. It was better. It was real, built on honesty and respect, and the stubborn determination to choose happiness even when the world tried to deny it to them. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and nervous anticipation. The storm cleared, leaving the world buried in pristine white. Colton continued his work, but now with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there before. Marjorie cleaned the house until it shone, baked bread and pies for the wedding celebration, and tried on the dress Agnes brought her, simple but beautiful, made from pale blue fabric that brought out the color in her eyes. They talked more in those 3 days than they had in the previous 3 weeks, about their pasts, their dreams, their fears, about what kind of life they wanted to build together, about children, maybe, someday, if it happened, about growing old on this ranch, making it prosper, creating something lasting, and slowly, tentatively, they began to touch more. Colton would brush his hand across Marjorie's shoulder as he passed. Marjorie would straighten his collar before he went out to work. Small gestures, but each one building toward intimacy, toward the physical partnership that would come after the vows. On the morning of the wedding, Colton rode into town early to meet Agnes and the preacher. Marjorie followed later in the wagon, her wedding dress carefully packed, her heart hammering with a mixture of excitement and terror. The boarding house was full of people when she arrived, far more than she'd expected. Agnes had invited everyone in town who had a decent bone in their body, and apparently that was more than Marjorie would have guessed. There were ranchers she didn't know, shopkeepers, the blacksmith, the doctor's wife, people who'd heard her story and been moved by it, or who simply disliked the Garretts enough to support anyone they opposed. Agnes swept her upstairs to change. The dress fit perfectly, cinched at the waist, with simple lace at the collar and cuffs. Agnes had even fashioned a small crown of dried flowers for her hair. "You look beautiful," Agnes said, tears in her eyes. "You look like a bride who's chosen her path." Marjorie looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 3 weeks ago, she had been broken, humiliated, defeated. Now she stood straight and tall, dressed in blue, about to marry a good man who valued her. "Thank you," she said to Agnes, "for everything, for the food on the train, for warning us about the Garretts, for this dress, for believing I was worth helping." "Oh, my dear," Agnes said, embracing her, "you were always worth helping. I just hope you finally believe that yourself." The ceremony was held in Agnes's sitting room, cleared of furniture to make space for witnesses. The preacher was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle voice. Colton stood at the front, dressed in his best clothes, a clean shirt, pressed pants, a coat that looked slightly too formal for him but somehow perfect for the occasion. When Marjorie walked in, his face lit up with such obvious joy that several people in the room sighed audibly. They stood before the preacher, hands clasped, and made their vows. Simple words, but weighted with meaning, to honor and cherish, to support and protect, to build a life together based on respect and partnership. When Colton slipped a simple gold band on her finger, bought, she later learned, with money he'd been saving for new breeding stock, Marjorie felt something lock into place inside her. This was real. This was happening. She was no longer alone, no longer unwanted, no longer powerless. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Ward." Colton leaned in, and this kiss was different from their first. It was deeper, more certain, full of promise. The room erupted in applause and cheers. They were married. Against all odds, despite all obstacles, Marjorie Hale, now Marjorie Ward, had found her place in the world. And it wasn't the place she'd expected or planned for. It was better. As they walked out of the boarding house into the bright winter afternoon, Marjorie saw a familiar carriage parked across the street. Constance Garrett sat in it, staring at them with an expression of pure fury. For a moment, their eyes met, and Marjorie saw all the venom, all the contempt, all the impotent rage of someone who'd expected to win and found themselves outplayed. Marjorie smiled, not a cruel smile, but a genuine one. A smile that said, "I'm still here. You tried to break me, and I'm still here." Then she turned to her husband, took his arm, and walked toward the wagon that would carry them home. together. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that exists between two people who don't need words to communicate. Colton drove the wagon with one hand, the other resting near Marjorie's on the seat between them. Every so often, their fingers would brush, and Marjorie would feel a jolt of awareness that she was married now, that this man beside her was her husband, that her life had changed irrevocably in the space of an hour. The winter sun was setting as they pulled into the valley, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Ghost came bounding out to meet them, barking joyfully, sensing the change in the air, even if she couldn't understand it. Colton helped Marjorie down from the wagon, and for a moment they stood there, looking at the small ranch house that was now officially their home together. "Well, Mrs. Ward," Colton said, and the name sent a thrill through Marjorie. "Welcome home." "It feels different," Marjorie said softly, "knowing it's really mine now. Not just a place I'm staying, but my home." "It's been your home since the day you agreed to stay," Colton said. "The wedding just made it official." They went inside, and the house was warm from the fire Colton had banked that morning. Marjorie moved through the familiar space with new eyes, seeing it as hers now. The kitchen where she'd learned to cook for two instead of one. The table where they'd shared so many meals and conversations. The rocking chair by the fire where she'd sit in the evenings, mending or reading while Colton worked on his ledgers. "Are you hungry?" she asked, suddenly nervous. They were married now. That meant things would change between them in ways she both anticipated and feared. "A little," Colton admitted. "But mostly I'm just—" He stopped, searching for words. "I'm happy. I know that's a simple thing to say, but it's true. I'm happy you're here. Happy you chose this. Happy you chose me." Marjorie set her small bag down and turned to face him fully. "I'm happy too. And terrified. Is that strange?" "Not at all," Colton said. He crossed to her, took her hands in his. "Marjorie, I want you to know something. Just because we're married doesn't mean I expect—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "What I mean is, we can take this as slow as you need. Your room is still your room. I won't push for anything you're not ready for." The tenderness in his voice, the respect inherent in his words, made Marjorie's eyes sting with tears. "You're a good man, Colton Ward." "I'm trying to be the man you deserve," he said simply. They ate a simple dinner of bread and cheese and cold chicken left over from the wedding celebration. They talked about the ceremony, about the people who'd attended, about the look on Constance Garrett's face when she'd seen them emerge as husband and wife. "Do you think they'll try something else?" Marjorie asked. "Maybe," Colton said honestly. "But their legal case is dead now. We're married, which means you're under my protection as my wife. Any claims of fraud or impropriety are meaningless, and if they try to hurt me economically, well," he shrugged, "I've weathered hard times before. I'll weather them again if I have to." "I don't want you to suffer because of me." "Then stop thinking of it as suffering because of you," Colton said. "Start thinking of it as choosing to stand up for what's right. The Garretts have bullied this territory for too long. Someone needed to push back. I'm glad it's me." That night, Marjorie did retire to her own room, but she left the door slightly ajar. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Colton moving around in the main room, banking the fire, checking the door. She heard him pause outside her room, heard him whisper, "Good night, Marjorie," before continuing to his own bedroom. "Good night, Colton," she whispered back, though she wasn't sure if he heard. She thought she'd lie awake for hours, mind spinning with the enormity of the day. But exhaustion claimed her quickly, and she slept deeply for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, secure in the knowledge that she was safe, valued, and chosen. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Marjorie was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard a horse approaching. Colton was out in the barn, and Marjorie felt a spike of fear. What if it was the Garretts, coming to cause more trouble? But when she looked out the window, she saw a single rider, a man she didn't recognize. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair and features that seemed vaguely familiar. He dismounted and stood uncertainly in the yard, looking toward the house like he wasn't sure he had the right place. Colton emerged from the barn, and Marjorie watched as the two men spoke. Even from a distance, she could see Colton's posture stiffen, his expression harden. The conversation was brief, and then, to her surprise, Colton gestured toward the house. The stranger followed him inside. Marjorie was standing by the stove when they entered. The stranger removed his hat, and up close she could see the resemblance more clearly. He had the Garrett features, the same nose, the same jawline, but his eyes were different, softer, kinder. "Marjorie," Colton said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is Thomas Garrett." The name hit her like a physical blow. Thomas, the man who'd written her letters, the man who'd promised to marry her and then sent his family to dispose of her like trash, the man whose cowardice had nearly destroyed her. Thomas was staring at her with an expression of mingled guilt and wonder. "Miss Hale," he said, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Ward, I had to come. I had to see if it was true." "What's true?" Marjorie's voice was cold. "That you married Ward. That you're—" He swallowed hard. "That you're alive and well. That my family didn't—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Didn't what?" Marjorie demanded. "Didn't destroy me? Didn't send me back east to starve? Didn't humiliate me in front of an entire town?" Her hands were shaking with anger. "Your family did all of that, Thomas. Or they tried to. The only reason I'm standing here now is because your family's cruelty was outmatched by a stranger's kindness." Thomas flinched. I know, and God, I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have met you myself. I should have stood up to them." "But you didn't," Marjorie said flatly. "You let them handle it. You let them treat me like I was nothing." "I was afraid," Thomas said, and there was genuine anguish in his voice. "I've been afraid my whole life. Afraid of Constance, afraid of Father, afraid of disappointing them, afraid of being less than what they expect. I thought—" He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "I thought if I let them meet you first, if they approved, it would be easier. I didn't think they'd be so cruel." "Then you don't know your family very well," Colton said quietly. Thomas looked at him. "No, I suppose I don't. Or I didn't want to admit what I knew." He turned back to Marjorie. "I read your letters so many times. You seemed kind and honest and brave, everything I wanted but was too cowardly to reach for. When I heard what happened at the station, I was sick about it, but I was also relieved." "Relieved?" Marjorie's voice rose. "You were relieved?" "Because it meant I didn't have to defy them," Thomas said miserably. "Because the decision was made for me. Because I could tell myself it wasn't my fault, that you were the problem, not me." He met her eyes. "But it was my fault, all of it. You told the truth in your letters. I checked, went through them all again. You never lied. You were exactly who you said you were. My family just decided that wasn't good enough." "It wasn't," Marjorie said coldly. "But that's their shame, not mine. I know my worth now." "I can see that," Thomas said softly. "I can see you found something here that I never could have given you. Ward's a good man. Better than me, certainly." "Why are you here, Thomas?" Colton asked. "What do you want?" Thomas drew a deep breath. "I'm leaving. I'm going to California. I've got money saved, money my mother left me that Father can't touch. I'm going to start over, try to become someone I can be proud of. But before I left, I needed to see you. Needed to apologize. Needed to tell you that I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm sorry anyway." Marjorie studied him, this man who'd been the catalyst for everything, her journey west, her humiliation, her eventual salvation. She'd imagined confronting him 100 times in her mind, imagined all the angry things she'd say. But now, looking at his guilty, miserable face, she felt something unexpected. Pity. "You're not a bad man, Thomas," she said finally. "You're just a weak one. And weakness can be as destructive as cruelty, in its own way." Thomas nodded slowly. "You're right, but maybe I can learn to be stronger. Maybe that's what California will teach me." "I hope it does," Marjorie said, and meant it. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for. I hope you become the man you could be instead of the man your family wants you to be." "Thank you," Thomas said quietly. He turned to Colton. "Take care of her. She deserves someone who will." "I know," Colton said. "And I will." Thomas put his hat back on, nodded to them both, and left. They watched through the window as he mounted his horse and rode away, out of their lives as quickly as he'd entered them. "How do you feel?" Colton asked. Marjorie thought about it. "Free," she said finally. "I feel free. He was this figure in my mind, this man who'd rejected me, and it gave him power. But seeing him like that, seeing how small and frightened he is, it took that power away." "He's not worth your anger," Colton observed. "No," Marjorie agreed. "He's not." She turned to her husband. "You are worth my love, though. I'm realizing that more every day." Colton's face softened. "I love you too, Marjorie. I should have said it before, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to push." "Say it now," Marjorie interrupted. "Say it now and mean it." "I love you," Colton said, crossing to her, taking her hands. "I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you hum when you cook. I love how you've made this house a home. I love that you chose to stay when you could have left. I love you, Marjorie Ward, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that choice." Marjorie pulled him down and kissed him, and this kiss was different from the others. It was deep and hungry and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I think," Marjorie said carefully, "that I'm ready for us to be truly married. Not just legally, but—" "Are you sure?" Colton asked. "We don't have to rush." "I'm sure," Marjorie said. "I'm sure because I trust you. I'm sure because I want this. I'm sure because I've spent too much of my life letting fear make my decisions, and I'm done with that." That night, they came together as husband and wife, and it was tender and awkward and beautiful in the way first times are. Afterward, lying in Colton's bed, their bed now, Marjorie felt something she'd never experienced before. Complete safety, complete acceptance, complete belonging. "I was sent back like unwanted cargo," she whispered into the darkness. "And somehow I ended up here, with you, happier than I ever imagined I could be." "You were never unwanted," Colton said, pulling her closer. "You were just waiting for the right person to see your value. I'm glad I was that person." Spring came early that year, or maybe it just seemed that way to Marjorie because she was finally, truly happy. The snow melted, revealing the brown grass beneath, which gradually turned green as the weeks passed. Wildflowers bloomed across the hillsides. Calves were born. The world felt new and full of possibility. Marjorie threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. She learned to ride properly, practiced until she could help Colton with the cattle. She planted a garden, tending it carefully, watching the first shoots of vegetables push through the soil with almost maternal pride. She befriended the neighboring ranch wives, women who'd been wary at first but warmed to her genuine kindness and work ethic. The Garretts left them alone. There were rumors that Robert's health was failing, that the ranch was having financial troubles, that Constance had become increasingly bitter and isolated. Marjorie tried not to take satisfaction in their struggles, but she couldn't help feeling that there was a certain justice in it. Agnes Morrison visited frequently, becoming a dear friend and surrogate mother. She'd bring news from town, fabrics for new dresses, books she thought Marjorie would enjoy. She was there when Marjorie discovered, 3 months after the wedding, that she was pregnant. "Oh, my dear," Agnes said, embracing her as Marjorie cried happy tears. "A baby! Colton must be over the moon." "I haven't told him yet," Marjorie admitted. "I wanted to be sure. But Agnes, I'm going to be a mother. Me, the girl from the Philadelphia slums who was sent back like defective merchandise. I'm going to have a family." "You already have a family," Agnes said gently. "But now it's growing, and that child will be so lucky to have parents who chose each other, who fought for each other, who built something real." Marjorie told Colton that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. His reaction was everything she'd hoped for, shock, then joy, then a fierce protectiveness that made her laugh even as it touched her heart. "I'm going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a child." "Are you happy?" Marjorie asked. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Colton said. He pulled her close. "A year ago, I was alone in this house, convinced I'd always be alone. Now I have you, and soon we'll have a baby. It's more than I ever dreamed of." The baby came in late November, a daughter with her mother's eyes and her father's steady temperament. They named her Hope because that's what she represented, hope for the future, hope that good things could come from terrible beginnings. Hope that love and choice and courage could overcome any obstacle. Marjorie held her daughter and thought about the journey that had brought her here. The desperate decision to answer a mail-order bride advertisement. The long, frightening train ride west. The humiliation on the Hollow Creek platform. The moment Colton had stepped forward and chosen her when no one else would. The fear and uncertainty of those first weeks. The confrontation with the Garretts, the wedding, all of it leading to this moment, holding her child in a warm house with her husband beside her, safe and loved and home. "What are you thinking?" Colton asked softly. "I'm thinking about that day on the platform," Marjorie said, "when your family was sending me back. When I thought my life was over." "And now?" "Now I know it was just beginning," Marjorie said. "I was rejected, yes, sent away like I didn't matter. But that rejection led me to you, led me to this life, led me to become someone I never knew I could be." She looked at her daughter's peaceful, sleeping face. "I was sent back, Colton, but what I found after being sent back was worth more than anything I'd hoped to find before." "You weren't sent back," Colton said quietly. "You were sent forward, to the life you were always meant to have." That winter, word came that Robert Garrett had died. His ranch, mired in debt, was being sold to pay his creditors. Constance and James were moving back east, their influence in the territory broken. Thomas, according to a letter Agnes received, had opened a small bookstore in San Francisco and was, by all accounts, finally finding himself. Marjorie felt no triumph at the news. The Garretts had hurt her, yes, but their downfall brought her no joy. She'd moved past them, built a life so full and rich that they'd become irrelevant. That was victory enough. Years passed. Hope grew into a bright, confident child, secure in her parents' love. She was joined by a brother, then another sister. The ranch prospered under Colton and Marjorie's combined efforts. They expanded the herd, built a bigger barn, added rooms to the house. Marjorie's garden became famous in the region, and she began selling preserves and vegetables to the general store in town. They faced hardships, as all ranchers did. Harsh winters, drought years, cattle prices that fluctuated wildly, but they faced them together as partners, supporting each other through every challenge. On their 10th anniversary, Colton surprised Marjorie with a gift, a small painting he'd commissioned from a traveling artist. It showed the Hollow Creek train platform, but instead of depicting Marjorie's humiliation, it showed the moment Colton had first seen her. She stood in profile, head high despite her circumstances, and in the painting's background, Colton was already moving toward her, already choosing to care. "So we never forget," Colton said, as Marjorie cried over it. "Never forget that the worst moment of your life led to the best moment of mine." "I thought I was being returned," Marjorie said, tracing the painted figures with her finger. "I thought I was cargo nobody wanted." "You were never cargo," Colton said, as he had so many times before. "You were always a person who deserved to be chosen, to be valued, to be loved. I just had the good sense to see it." Marjorie hung the painting in their bedroom, where she could see it every morning when she woke. A reminder of how far she'd come. A reminder that rejection isn't always the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of something better. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch work was done, Marjorie and Colton would sit on their porch and watch the stars emerge over the Wyoming mountains. They'd hold hands and talk about their day, about their plans, about the life they'd built from nothing but courage and choice. And sometimes Marjorie would think about that frightened girl on the train platform, being sent away like unwanted goods. She'd think about how that girl had wanted nothing more than safety and security, how she'd been willing to settle for so much less than she deserved because she didn't know she deserved more. She'd think about the moment Colton had blocked the Garrett's path and said, "She's not freight, she's a person." About the moment he'd offered her a choice instead of orders. About the moment he'd said, "If no one wants her, I do," and meant it with his whole heart. And she'd realize over and over again that being sent back was the best thing that ever happened to her, because it led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. A life she'd chosen. A life where she mattered. A life where she was loved, not despite her circumstances, but because of who she was beneath them. She'd been rejected by people who judged her by her poverty, her past, her lack of social standing, but she'd been chosen by someone who saw her character, her strength, her heart. And that choice, his choice, her choice, their mutual choice to build something together had made all the difference. Standing beneath the wide Wyoming sky, with her husband beside her and her children sleeping safely in the house they'd built together, Marjorie Ward knew something she'd once thought impossible. She'd found her place in the world. Not the place others had tried to force her into, but the place she'd claimed for herself. She'd been returned like unwanted cargo. But what she'd found in the returning was worth more than any destination she'd originally imagined. She'd found love, she'd found partnership, she'd found dignity, she'd found herself. And in a territory that had once seemed hostile and foreign, she'd found home. Not because someone gave it to her, but because she'd earned it, because she'd chosen it. Because when the world had tried to send her back, she'd said, "No, I'm staying. I'm choosing my own future. I'm claiming my own life." The train had pulled away without her, taking with it all the small dreams and desperate hopes she'd carried west. But what she'd built in its place was bigger, stronger, and more real than anything those dreams had promised. She'd been chosen when she thought she was unwanted. She'd been valued when she thought she was worthless. She'd been loved when she thought she was unlovable. And that, Marjorie thought, as Colton squeezed her hand in the twilight, was worth every moment of pain it had taken to get here. Every humiliation, every fear, every tear. Because they'd led her to this moment, to this life, to this profound and simple happiness. She'd been returned. And in being returned, she'd found everything she'd ever needed. Not the fantasies she'd imagined, but something better, something real, something chosen, something earned through courage and resilience and the simple, radical act of refusing to disappear. The winter wind carried the scent of snow and pine and possibility. Inside the house, her children dreamed. Beside her, her husband sat steady and sure. And Marjorie Ward, once Marjorie Hale, once the rejected mail-order bride, once the unwanted cargo, Marjorie Ward smiled into the gathering darkness and knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home.